Chapter 7 of the Romance of Modern Engineering. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Sonia. The Romance of Modern Engineering by Archibald Williams. Chapter 7. The Trans-Siberian Railway. On the 9th of November, 1901, the following telegram flashed along the wires from Mr. Witt to his Imperial Master the Tsar. On May 19th, 1891, Your Majesty at Vladivostok turned with your own hand the first sod of the Great Siberian Railway. Today, on the anniversary of your accession to the throne, the East Asiatic Railway is completed. I venture to express to Your Majesty, from the bottom of my heart, my loyal congratulations on this historic event. With the laying of the rails for a distance of 2,400 versts from the Trans-Baikal territory to Vladivostok and Port Arthur, our enterprise in Manchuria is practically, though not entirely, concluded. Notwithstanding exceptionally difficult conditions and the destruction of a large portion of the line last year, temporary traffic can, from day to day, be carried on along the whole system. I hope that within 2 years hence all the remaining work to be done will be completed, and that the railway will be opened for permanent regular traffic. To which the Tsar replied, I thank you sincerely for your joyful communication. I congratulate you on the completion within so short a time, and amid incredible difficulties, of one of the greatest railway undertakings in the world. 10 years, 4,000 miles of railway laid down, more than a mile a day, a record. Europe and Western civilization at the one extremity, China and Eastern civilization at the other. In between, the greatest of the continents, and across that continent the unbroken, save for a few miles, band of iron. A huge country, covering 5 million square miles of swamp and forest and rich cornland, and mountains and deserts. A country of intense cold and great heat. A country outwardly wretched, but hiding in its bosom treasure incalculable. A country of mighty rivers, flowing from the central mountains of Asia to the Arctic Ocean, frozen solid half the year, but at certain seasons among the most magnificent waterways of the world. A country that was once inhabited by a great population, and then for ages the abode of a few wandering tribes, now receiving fresh life from tens of thousands of emigrants who pour into it from Russia over the Iron Way. A country, in short, of which but a few years ago we knew little whatsoever, even less that was enticing or creditable or propitious. We regarded it as a mere dumping ground for Muscovite criminals, chained to the deadly labor of the mines, or cast abroad to fare as best they might in the great solitudes. But now it has suddenly leapt into notice as a new land of promise, to which are turned the eager and inquiring eyes of half the world. The story of Siberia begins with the picturesque figure of Yermak, the millstone, a boatman who plied his trade on Little Mother Volga, as the Russians fondly term their mightiest river. He fell into a bad habit of piracy, and after a series of murders was forced to flee for his life to the Urals, where he met a family of traders who were preparing an expedition to Siberia, the land of the precious sable. He entered their service as trapper, and in 1581 started for hunting grounds far away in the heart of North Asia. Many doughty deeds were wrought by Yermak and his followers in their struggle with the Tatar tribes, and his victories over the savage tribes brought him pardon and great honor. But his enemies killed him at last, and other leaders took his place, penetrating further and further eastwards in search of sable, suffering terribly at times, but still pushing on the limits of the empire to Tobolsk, Yeniseisk, Irkutsk. In 1650 the gallant Habarov conquered the territory of the Amur and brought the Russian standard to the Pacific Ocean. Then followed a period of rest for 200 years, at the end of which General Muravyov formally annexed the district, which by the Treaty of Pekin, 1861, passed into Muscovite hands forever. The Russians now had an important province in the Far East, washed by the waters of a great ocean and traversed by a noble river. They determined that it should be joined to their European possessions by something more commodious and more safe than the ill-made, bandit-infested post road that wound its muddy or frozen length across the steppes and mountains. America had been spanned by the Iron Way. Why not Siberia? The engineering difficulties arising from natural configuration would not be insuperable. Jogging the Russian elbow was the Anglo-Saxon engineer. It is interesting to note that the scheme of laying a ribbon of steel across the Asiatic continent first matured in English and American brains. As far back as 1857, an American named Collins offered to connect Irkutsk to Chita, some hundreds of miles east of Lake Baikal. The following year an English syndicate proposed a railway from Moscow to the Sea of Japan, and undertook its construction for a price. But the Russians preferred to wait until such time as their own engineers could cope with the Herculean task. For 40 years they planned and surveyed, gathering experience from the great railway pushed eastward to Merv and Samarkand. So strong was their faith in the potentialities of the great lone land of Asia as a dwelling place for their teeming millions, that when at last the work was taken in hand, they faced an enormous expenditure despite the financial straits in which their country was sometimes involved. The sum of £40,000,000 was voted for the construction of the line. In order to expedite its progress, its total length, from Chelyabinsk on the European frontier to Vladivostok on the Japan Sea, was divided into the following divisions. 1. Chelyabinsk to Obi, the Western Siberian section, 800 miles long. 2. Obi to Irkutsk, the Central Siberian section, 1,137 miles. 3. Irkutsk to Mysolvaya, on the southeast shore of Lake Baikal. 4. Mysolvaya to Stretyansk, the Trans-Baikal section, 686 miles. 5. Stretyansk to Khabarovsk, on the Ussuri River, the Amur section, 1,326 miles. 6. Khabarovsk to Vladivostok, the Ussurian Railway, 478 miles. The first sod was cut and the first barrow-load wheeled at Vladivostok by the present Tsar, who in 1891, as Tsarevich, made a grand tour of the East. A start was made at the Chelyabinsk end in the following year. Ever since, construction has steadily progressed, in the face of physical and other difficulties, at a pace which eclipses the laying of the great trunk lines of the United States and Canada. In December 1895, the Trans-Siberian was completed to Omsk, in 1896 to Obi, in 1896 to Irkutsk, 3,371 miles east of Moscow. Simultaneously, the Ussurian section had reached Khabarovsk, so that in 7 years 2,503 miles of rail had been opened to traffic. Stretyansk was reached in July 1900, and there the original scheme terminated. To avoid carrying the line along the Amur, an arrangement was come to with the Chinese government in 1896, by which the engineers were given rights to drive the track across North Manchuria in an almost straight line to Vladivostok, and in 1898 the Russo-Chinese Bank, alias Russian government, obtained a concession to make a branch due south from the Manchurian section to Port Arthur on the Gulf of Petchili. These sections were pushed forward with the greatest possible speed, owing to political events in the Far East, which demanded the presence of large bodies of troops to protect, or extend, Russian interests. The Trans-Siberian Railway, as measured from Chelyabinsk, has a length to Vladivostok of 3,967 miles, and to Port Arthur of 4,242 miles. If we add to this the Ussurian system and the section running northeast from Chelyabinsk to Kotles on the northern Dwina, we arrive at the grand total of nearly 6,000 miles, or about double the mileage of the Canadian Pacific. The railway in its course crosses the upper waters of the Obi, Yenisei, Lena, and Amur, at points where they begin to be easily navigable by vessels of considerable size. These rivers, each between 2,000 and 3,000 miles long, exclusive of tributaries, are being connected by canals, which will form the most splendid system of water communication in the world, and act as feeders to the great railway at many points. Their utility during the construction of the latter has been incalculable. 3 names are conspicuous among the many connected with this gigantic undertaking: those of the Tsar, who is president of the Railway Committee, of Mr. Witt, the Minister of Finance, and of Prince Hirkov. Of these, the second was once a station master on the southern Russian railways, and the third worked under an assumed name as a paid employee on the railroads of the United States, where, in the shops and elsewhere, he gained the great store of practical knowledge that he is now turning to such good account. The chorus of admiration evoked by the successful termination of their labors has been unanimous. Yet questions have been raised about 2 points, on which criticism has laid a finger. To the outsider it is a matter of surprise that the railway should have given a wide berth to Tobolsk, the capital of Western Siberia, and to Tomsk, the capital of the central provinces. These towns will be served by branch lines, but it is open to doubt whether in the future their importance will not decline, and new towns situated on the main track take up the mantle that has fallen from their shoulders. Engineers of other nations also wonder why rails of such lightness at 18 pounds to the foot have been used, while 20 to 25 pound rails are the common practice in Russia, and 28 to 33 pound rails the rule in Europe and other countries. We must, however, remember that the need for economy was most pressing, and that in using the lighter rails the committee have precedence in the United States, where in many instances heavy metals are laid down only when traffic has assumed certain proportions. Already sections are being relaid with 70-pound rails, those they replace being relegated to the sidings, which occur at frequent intervals throughout the system. To gain an adequate idea of the immensity of the Great Siberian, we should undoubtedly travel over it. A map, even on a large scale, is but a poor aid to the imagination. Omsk and Obi, to take an instance, seem but a few miles apart on paper, whereas a journey equal to that from London to Edinburgh separates them. Place one point of a pair of compasses at Chelyabinsk and the other at Berlin. Describe a circle, and it passes through Lake Baikal, some 1,500 miles from the journey's end. We will nevertheless endeavor to gain some conception of what the traveler sees, by calling Aladdin's genie to our aid, and transporting ourselves to the terminal station at Moscow, the finest station of the old capital, from which a train is about to start on its 4,000-mile trip. A fashionable throng fills the waiting rooms and buffets, for the departure of the Siberian Express is still a novelty, and attended by more than the usual amount of bustle and leave-taking connected with a long journey. Russians are very proud of their express, which is indeed worthy of our close attention. In it the travellers will be confined for a fortnight at least, so we will see how their comfort has been provided for. First we notice that the train is lit throughout by electric light, generated in a special compartment by a separate boiler and engine. Even the head and tail lights are fed from this source. One car is fitted up as a drawing room, with luxurious chairs and couches, upholstered in soft leather, writing tables, a piano, maps. Another contains a restaurant, where a first-class meal may be had at all hours of the day, a beautifully fitted bathroom, and an exercising machine. When you wish to retire for the night, press the electric bell button, and a servant appears to make up the comfortable bed that is cunningly folded away during the daytime. Above the bed are levers to admit fresh air or hot water to the heating apparatus as you wish. The corridors that traverse the train from end to end are provided with filter ventilators, which keep out the dust and let in oxygen. This train de luxe is put on by the International Sleeping Car Company, a guarantee for everything being all that the heart of the traveler could wish. At 9 p.m. the engine gives a deep whistle and draws out into the night, and on to the rolling steppes that stretch away monotonously east and west and south and north for hundreds upon hundreds of miles. Yet these are some of the greatest granaries of Europe. Large stretches are checkered with the green of the growing crop, or the gold of the harvest, or the grey of the stubble. Giant straw stacks proclaim an abundant harvest past, threshed by the trampling ponies of the peasant, and winnowed after the manner of the Israelites. On, over the steppes to Batraki, where a splendid bridge, named in honor of Alexander II, crosses the Volga, with 13 spans of 350 feet each, a total of nearly a mile. Then we roll into Samara, a city of 90,000 souls, whence a branch line runs south to Orenburg, with Tashkent as its ultimate objective. This region some years ago was swept by a fearful famine that carried off the population like flies, and covered the steppes with their graves. 200 miles and we reach Ufa, a town of many churches and schools, hospitals and asylums for poor and aged, libraries and museums, a town of which the poorer classes are sunk in deep ignorance like their fellows in the rest of the empire. This is one of the anomalies of Russia, utter illiteracy hand in hand with splendid equipment for learning. The train has now begun to taste the Urals, which heave themselves up between the vast plain of Russia and the vaster Siberian plain beyond. The hillsides bristle with broad expanses of fir and birch forest, but the grey rock breaks through at the summit. We pass Zulea, the famous iron district, whence have come millions of tons of metal, and reach Zlatoust, on the summit of the range. A few miles further on is the far-famed Stone of Parting, one of the most pathetic landmarks ever reared by the hand of man. A simple triangular obelisk, on one side the word Europe, on another Asia. How many tear-stained, heart-broken partings has this dumb stone witnessed! How many thousands of chained convicts have defiled here, urged by the whip of Cossack, torn from the arms of the friends that gaze sorrowfully after them from beyond the limit of Europe. We are soon on the downgrade. The scenery merges once more into that of the steppes, here covered with high grass, birch trees, and small swampy lakes. Chelyabinsk, the first station on the Siberian line proper. The junction for the line that runs northwards through Yekaterinburg, Perm, Vyatka, to Kotlas on the Dwina, from which port goods are sea-borne to England. This outlet of Siberian trade will be hugely developed in the future. Before passing into Siberia, let us endeavor to form an idea of that country, hitherto of darkness, now being brought to the light by the magic of the engineer. Physically, Siberia is divided into three great zones: the tundra, or frozen swamps of the north, abode of almost perpetual frost; the taiga, the most wonderful belt of forest on this earth, stretching for 1,000 miles and more, east and west between the tundra and the most valuable belt of all, the steppes, deeply covered by stoneless dark earth, which with proper cultivation will become one of the greatest granaries of the world. Were Siberia but blessed with a warmer climate, there would be no land to compare with it, such is its extent and variety. So intense is the cold, reaching to 50 degrees below zero in many places, that even during summer the earth is still frozen hard, but a few feet below the surface, while crops wave above. In winter the rivers are not merely covered with ice, but actually frozen solid. On account of the climatic conditions, the engineers met with many and great hardships and difficulties. While constructing the Trans-Baikal section, they had to blast the cuttings with dynamite, as the earth was congealed to the consistency of rock. At the stations, water supply pipes had to be laid in culverts provided with a heating apparatus, and masonry could be built only in artificially warmed shelters. The Usurian railway was driven with the greatest difficulty through virgin forests of cedar and larch, intertwined with wild vines and creepers, and when made the track often suffered severely from the heavy floods that occurred during the best working season. Plague wrought havoc among the beasts of burden, and fever swept off many of the workmen. In the Kirghiz steppes, too, water and cold taxed the utmost exertions of the constructors. No less than 30 miles of bridges cross the many rivers over which the railway passes, and for hundreds of miles the track is protected from flood only by being raised on a 5-foot embankment above the surrounding country. In the mountainous districts of the Altai and Yablonoi, the engineers had to overcome difficulties comparable to those encountered in the Rockies and Andes. To return to Chelyabinsk, the quarantine station, where all emigrants must show a clean bill of health. Our train progresses at a leisurely 15 miles an hour through the monotonous landscape, which the iron way traverses with mathematical straightness for several leagues at a stretch. Every verst we see the watchman, an ex-convict, step from his little hut and wave his flag to show that all is right on his length. Every 20 versts or so we pass a wayside station, generally on a loop to give a clear passage to express traffic. As a rule, the stations are well built and clean, surrounded by neat palisades, each with its water tower and storehouse, earthed up to the roof to keep out the cold. Now and then in the sidings we see a 3rd or 4th class train full of settlers on the way to their new homes, crowded like sheep into windowless trucks. Or perhaps there are windows, gridded with bars, from behind which peer the faces of convicts, bound for the prisons and mines of the interior. A fine bridge, 2,400 feet long, leads us across the Irtish into Omsk, founded by Peter the Great. It has been prophesied of Omsk that some day it will be the chief town of Siberia, as the center of a great system of waterways, and near important gold fields and copper mines, and the even more valuable coal deposits of Pavlodar, where is said to be a seam 300 feet thick, extending for miles. Vast quantities of coke will be produced here, shipped down the Irtish to Tyumen, and thence transported to the Urals for the iron works, a supply the importance of which will be appreciated by those who know anything about the iron industry. A railway has been projected to run from Omsk southwards to join the system of Central Asia, which is also being pushed forward vigorously by the Russian military authorities. This would complete an enormous triangle, with corners at Samara, Omsk, and Tashkent. 300 miles of track through the great corn-growing steppes bring us to Obi, the end of the West Siberian section, opened in October 1896, which in 3 years has sprung from zero to a population of 14,000. Our next stopping place is Taiga, another example of rapid growth, owing to its being the junction for Tomsk. This latter town, despite its fine university, electric light, and 50,000 inhabitants, may in a few years be eclipsed by its southern new-born neighbor. The word taiga tells us what to expect in our progress. The scenery changes. The steppe gives way to mile after mile of forest, one of the most valuable assets of the Tsar, in an age when the world's timber supply has sensibly diminished. We drop down into Krasnoyarsk, the city of the Red Rock, the chief town of the Yenisei government, possessed of the finest gardens in Siberia, where imported trees fare badly. Like Omsk, it is situated on a mighty river, the Yenisei, which rises in Mongolia and takes its broad course for 2,500 miles to the Arctic Ocean. Ships come hither direct from London. On the east of the town, a fine bridge of 6 spans, each span 474 feet, clears the river. The separate spans were put together on the bank and launched into position by means of rollers and a special crane. We now rise to breast the Altai Mountains, which passed, we soon reach Irkutsk, the terminus of the Central Siberian. Irkutsk, on the Angara, the great tributary of the Yenisei, is a curious mixture of new civilization and barbarism. It owns a fine theatre that cost £30,000 and a good museum, a telegraph office whence messages may be sent all over the world, an organized telephone service stretching 50 miles into the country, an excellently equipped fire service, a noble cathedral, shops in which you may buy all the luxuries of the West, and a bank. It is also one of the 3 centers to which all gold mined in the district must be sent for tests in the government laboratories. Since its erection in 1870, the laboratory has passed £60 million worth of gold. But owing to the presence of escaped convicts, Irkutsk has been described as the one place in the Russian Empire where a man cannot feel safe. To go alone in the streets after dark is risky, as the police cannot cope with the ruffians of the place. Consequently, people retire indoors early, closely bar their doors, and before going to bed fire a revolver out of the window to warn would-be marauders and housebreakers what to expect. A short journey from Irkutsk brings us to the most interesting spot on the railway, Lake Baikal. The Holy Sea, as the Russians call it, is one of the largest freshwater lakes of the world, yielding place in size only to Superior, Huron, Michigan, and Victoria Nyanza. It has an area of 14,500 square miles, and so great is its profundity that, though its surface is 1,500 feet above sea level, its lowest depth descends several thousand feet below the bosom of the Pacific Ocean. On all sides mountains gird it in with frowning cliffs and indent it with 80 capes. For the native it is an object of worship and superstition, since on the island of Olkhon dwells Begdozi, the evil spirit, who must be appeased by sacrifice. From the north end flows out the Shilka, a tributary of the Lena. From the southwest the Angara, the main feeder of the Yenisei. The waters are much vexed by storms, which raise waves 6 or 7 feet high. In November the lake begins to freeze, and for 4½ months is held in the grip of winter, under an ice coating 9 feet thick, traversed by huge cracks that make sleigh traffic risky and uncertain. The lake is the most serious obstacle that the engineers had to face, for the mountainous nature of its setting renders the circuit of the south end a very arduous and costly task that will not be completed for several years to come. For present purposes the gap in the line is served by a train carrying steamer, the Baikal, specially built for forcing a passage through the ice. Jetties supported on caissons project into the lake at the termini, separated by 42 miles of water, and by means of a platform adjustable to the varying level of the lake, transfer the train to the boat, where it is accommodated on one of the 3 tracks that are laid along the axis of the middle deck. The Baikal is a vessel of 4,000 tons, driven by 3 engines of 1,250 horsepower each, working 2 screws in the stern and 1 in the bow. The vessel was built by Sir William Armstrong, Whitworth and Co. at the Elswick Works, Newcastle on Tyne, then taken to pieces and the parts delivered at St. Petersburg. Wagons transported the pieces, the heaviest, weighing about 20 tons, to Krasnoyarsk, and sleighs continued the journey to Irkutsk, whence the parts were floated down the Angara to the lake. Russian workmen, superintended by English engineers, there assembled the parts and added the boilers, pumps, and other machinery. The icebreaker is 290 feet long, and of 57-foot beam. Ballast tanks, distributed in the double bottom, hold 580 tons of water. At the water line she is protected by a belt of steel plates, reinforced with heavy wooden beams, 2 feet thick. On the upper deck are spacious and comfortable saloons for the accommodation of 150 passengers. In clear water the Baikal makes 13 to 14 knots an hour. Ice 3½ feet thick gives way to her. The forward screw scoops out the water ahead, and the stern propellers force the vessel up onto the ice until her weight breaks through, her advance being 3 to 6 miles an hour. A second icebreaker, the Angara, is 195 feet long and 34 in beam, and of equal speed, but smaller ice-cleaving power. Like the sister vessel, she was transported to the lake in pieces and there assembled. While on the subject of icebreakers, among the most interesting of steam vessels, we may glance at the Yermak, built in 1898 for service in the Baltic. She has a displacement of 4,000 tons, length 305 feet, beam 71 feet, depth 42½ feet, 8,000 horsepower, speed 15 knots. Her shape is such that, when pinched in ice, she tends to rise after the manner of Nansen's Fram. On her trial trip among Arctic floes, she easily dealt with ice many feet thick, and in the Baltic she has been of the greatest use in extracting frozen-in vessels, including a warship. East of Lake Baikal, the line rises into the Yablonai Mountains, attains a maximum elevation of 3,412 feet, and descends to Naidalova, the junction of the Stretians branch and the main line, which reaches the Russian frontier at Nagadan. This is a little explored country, inhabited by Mongols, of which the chief traffic is the tea-carrying trade. The line is well laid here on heavy rails, supported by ties bedded in cement. Beyond Hailar, a town of 3,000 inhabitants, it crosses an elevated plateau to the great Khingan Range, and then drops once more to Harbin, on the Sungari River, which is the engineering headquarters of the Chinese railway. To this district legend assigns the birthplace of Genghis Khan, who, in his many wars and invasions, is said to have destroyed 5 or 6 million human beings. In the beginning of the 13th century he overran Western Asia with steel and fire, and today the same elements have invaded his land in turn. But the steel is in rails and the fire in the furnaces of mighty locomotives. At Harbin we can take our choice of Port Arthur or Vladivostok, the former 500, the latter 350 miles away, though on the map we appear almost at the end of our travels. Selecting Port Arthur, we jog slowly along past Mukden, the largest town yet encountered with its 200,000 souls. A short branch of 20 miles links it with the main line. Dalny, on the Gulf of Korea, is our next halting place, and a unique city. For though streets and squares have been laid out, schools and churches provided, electric light and cars installed, there is as yet no population. It is a town quickly built for the future, one that may become a great port, thanks to its situation on an open harbor which never freezes. At Port Arthur we end our roaming on the Iron Way. Here we see the mailed fist of Russia in the batteries bristling with cannon of all sizes, from the 12-inch monster to the 4-inch quick-firer, in the barracks to shelter large bodies of troops, in the torpedo boats darting in and out of the harbor under the shadow of the huge man-o'-war, in the dockyards, and in the military carriage and accoutrements of every one we meet. 100 miles north of Port Arthur the Pekin branch diverges. Russia has thus a hold on the very throat of China. Today a regiment may be in Moscow. In 3 weeks' time its officers may issue their orders within the walls of Pekin. This, then, is one of the real issues of the Siberian Railway. The immense leverage that it will give to the Muscovite in any struggle with the Mongolian. Over the iron track will roll all the martial arts and engines of the West. Is the time ever coming when the Mongolian will reverse the order of things and pour his countless hordes again towards Europe, now so much nearer than in the time of great Genghis? The Russians have spent, or will have to spend, upwards of £100,000,000 before their great line is in first-class running order. Honor to whom honor is due, the railway is a magnificent scheme, carried through with indomitable perseverance. But will it pay? This is the question asked by Russians, English, Germans, Americans, the world. There are those who are ready to utter Cassandra prophecies of broken finances, climatic deterrents to immigration, frontier troubles with the Chinese. But a far larger number see in the railway returns a promise of a bright future. It has been mentioned that the line was laid with light metals, this because the initial traffic was expected to be but moderate. What happened? Scarcely were the sections declared open than a rush set in. In 1898, 100,000 tons of goods accumulated on the western and central lines, waiting months to be forwarded to their destination. The line was utterly unable to cope with the immense body of merchandise thrust onto it. In 1899 the same thing recurred, 7,000 wagons blocking the line. Consider these figures. In 1896 the Western Siberian carried 160,000 passengers, 69,000 emigrants, 169,470 tons of merchandise. In 1897, 236,000 ordinary passengers, 78,000 emigrants, 242,000 tons. In 1898, the figures increased respectively to 535,000, 133,000, 449,000. The Central Siberian, in the first year named, carried 14,700 passengers. In 1898, 407,680. Merchandise increased from 16,350 tons to 250,816 tons. Since 1898, the augmentation has continued. How could it be otherwise? On the one hand, a new country, richer in gold than the Transvaal, richer in coal than any other country, richer in graphite than Ceylon and Cumberland, the greatest timber-growing country, a great future granary, bountifully stocked with valuable fur animals, a Midas treasure-house of iron, copper, tin, lead, silver, salt, precious stones, the coming paradise of the hunter and tourist, a present well-developed grazing and cereal country. On the other hand, a vigorous government bent on making room for the millions that in European Russia live in a wretched state of semi-starvation, capitalists of all nations eager to invest their wealth in enterprises that may yield a huge return, a world that finds in the Trans-Siberian the shortest and quickest route from Europe to the Pacific. The Russians promise that, when their grand line is in full working order, the journey from London to Shanghai will be possible in 15 to 16 days, made up as follows: London to Moscow, 3 days; Moscow to Vladivostok, 10 days; Vladivostok to Shanghai, 3 days. This at a cost of about £50, food included. By sea the same journey costs at present nearly double this sum, and occupies rather more than double the estimated time. The following will then be the shortest route between the United States and the Far East, via Siberia, New York, Havre, Paris. London passengers will go via Dover and Ostend to Cologne, Cologne, Berlin, Alexandrova, Warsaw, Moscow, Tula, Samara, Chelyabinsk, Irkutsk, Sretyensk, Mukden, Port Arthur, and the total length of this journey, excluding the Atlantic, about 7,300 miles, of which 297 miles will be in France, 99 miles in Belgium, 660 miles in Germany, 2,310 miles in European Russia, and about 4,000 miles in Asiatic Russia. These are the official figures. Another quotation bears on the same subject. From January 1905, a train de luxe composed solely of first-class carriages will be run by the company from Warsaw to Moscow and Port Arthur. The train will be run as many times weekly as the company may deem advisable. The value of the new concessions obtained by the company may be inferred from the fact that its Northern Express, its Southern Express, its Eastern Express, etc., unite all the capitals of Europe and Warsaw, where passengers will find Trans-Siberian carriages. The reason why a more thoroughly effective service of international trains de luxe will not be commenced by the company before 1905 is that it is not until that year that a line running round Lake Baikal will be completed. When this line has been opened for traffic, and when the permanent way of the Trans-Siberian line has also been improved, an acceleration of the train service will be practicable. The Trans-Siberian line will not only be a means of transit between Western Europe and Japan and the north of China, but it will also be the shortest route between England and Australia. It is expected, indeed, that it will eventually be possible to reach Australia from London via Siberia in 22 days. We may here bid farewell to the great Siberian, but before leaving the confines of the Russian Empire, a word should be said of the great water schemes which are playing, and will play, as important a part in its development as the far-reaching tracks of the Iron Horse. For more than 100 years after the time of Peter the Great, Russia depended for the transportation of her population and commerce on the 60,000 miles of natural waterway with which she is endowed. Her physical configuration is such that all her large rivers rise in the plateau of the Valdai Hills, thereby affording the engineer a unique opportunity for using his arts to the immense advantage of the country at but a small comparative expense. A total of 1,000 miles of canals unites the headwaters of the Volga, Don, Dnieper, Dwina, and Duna, enabling boats to pass from the Caspian to the White Sea, from the Black Sea to the Baltic, and from St. Petersburg to the foot of the Ural Mountains. With the growth of the railway system has come a great expansion of canal mileage. It is today recognized that the era of the canal and canalized rivers, so far from being of the past, is but entering its period of greatest usefulness as the handmaid of the metal track. The Manchester Ship Canal, the Kiel Canal, the Corinthian Canal for sea-going vessels, the network of smaller channels for smaller craft that wrinkles the face of America, China, India, and Europe, are witness to this. Huge schemes are in the air, on paper, in progress. The greatest of all these in Russia is the Baltic Black Sea Ship Canal, some 2,000 miles in length. A syndicate of French and Belgian engineers offered to cut a channel 28 feet deep from the Baltic to Kherson, an important port on the Dnieper, of such amplitude as to float a heavy warship from one end to the other. The price asked was £140 millions, too great for the present means of the government, though in the future the plan will probably be carried out, and so pass into the greatest of all engineering feats. Further schemes connect the Black Sea with the Sea of Azov by a canal through the narrow neck joining the Crimea to the mainland, and the Black Sea with the Caspian by uniting the Don with the Volga. A company has already offered to effect the connection for the sum of £8 millions. The attempt was made 200 years ago by the great Peter, and frustrated by the physical difficulties. These include the shallowness of the Don, which at its mouth is beset with shifting sandbars. Here the powerful and effective steam dredger will have a fine field open to it in clearing away these troubles to navigation. The canal made, what possibilities would unfold themselves? The Volga, which, with its tributaries, numbers 8,000 miles, is the home of great steamers of 6,000 tons capacity, huge floating tanks of Baku petroleum, enormous timber rafts, 15,000 come down annually, barges and small vessels innumerable. On its banks are Astrakhan, Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod. where 40,000,000 pounds changes hands at the great fair in a few weeks, and the old capital, Moscow. The Caspian is flanked on all sides by districts that will flourish by and by, and lies on the north of Persia, which country would be connected directly to the Mediterranean Sea by the proposed canal, and so obtain a northern outlet to supplement the Persian Gulf on the south. Nor do Russian plans stop at the Caspian. The conquerors of Turkestan would bend to their will the mighty Oxus, one of the most storied rivers in the world, and divert it from its present to its ancient bed, so that instead of seeking the Aral Sea, it may empty itself into the Caspian, inasmuch as the Oxus, or Amu Darya, is in places over a mile wide, has a volume 3 times that of the Danube, and draws its waters from the eternal snows of the Pamirs. The project is one that may be described as sensational. The deflection would lower the level of the Aral Sea, but would open a waterway from the whole world to the borders of Afghanistan, whither steamers already ply on the river itself. Mention has already been made of the canal that links St. Petersburg with the Urals, which oppose a wall between the Russian and Siberian waterways. On the eastern side of the range are the Obi and Yenisei, joined by a canal which renders navigation of large boats possible from the Urals to Lake Baikal, and thence to the very borders of China. Some years ago a syndicate of private individuals tried to cut a canal through the Urals to supply the missing link between the Baltic and Mongolia. When a few miles had been finished, the fatherly government stepped in and declared that such a work was for the state to direct, and must wait for its completion until finances permit. There is a prospect that at no far distant time we shall be able to float our houseboats on a holiday trip for 6,000 miles in Russian territory through the hearts of 2 continents. These projects and feats are indeed startling proof of the new leaven that is working in that wonderful mass of despotism, militarism, officialism, guiding, grinding poverty, and benighted ignorance, with the tenacious enthusiasm and genius of master minds. At present the official commands, and the mujik, poor downtrodden machine, obeys. But when the leaven has leavened the whole lump down to the poorest peasant, what will the empire that has the Trans-Siberian, Trans-Caspian, Trans-Caucasian railways to its credit, not to mention 100 works of comparable difficulty, have to fear from comparison with the mightiest nations that have ever been? End of chapter 7.